Your higher self is the truest part of your soul. It is the part that is unencumbered by fear, unencumbered by limitation, and full of inherent self-worth or dignity. It knows what you are worthy of.
Well, Mory, welcome to From Vision to Creation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Mory, honestly, after reading your book, there's so much I want to talk to you about. I'm not quite sure where to begin. But let's start with your childhood. In your book, you talk about a few childhood issues that you had, things that kind of sparked your mission to find your higher self. Can you kind of talk to us about your childhood and what the impetus was for doing this kind of work?
Yeah, I think when I describe my childhood, what I say most often is I was born into chaos or crisis. My parents are immigrants. They fled Iran before the Islamic Revolution. And I was a surprise. My sister's 9.5 years older, so you always know when you're a surprise. And so my mom really wanted to go back and introduce her baby to her family, who she's really close to. And so we ended up going back to Iran and getting stuck there for 1.5 years during the Iran-Iraq war. And so that really is the beginning of my formation around life being chaotic and me learning that that was the normal and learning how to navigate in that kind of environment of things constantly changing, feeling a lack of safety. My parents then got divorced when we moved back, and my mom was a single mom, and there was a lot of financial pressure that I watched my mom go through in addition to the heartbreak of being a single parent. And, I think that I grew up with this notion that, I was able to see the solution often in these moments of chaos very clearly. Mm-hmm. And without knowing it, that was really where my relationship with my intuition began, is that there was just this really steady guiding voice always in my life that knew the way out. And I really started to go towards that and built a career out of crisis management because, what you grow up in really is your normal. And so crisis to me was not a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so I went into the world of crisis management because I had this ability to be the calm in the storm. And it wasn't until I had my own life crisis, which was really realizing I was not in a marriage that was healthy for me, that I was about to have my second child, and that my career was asking a lot of me without a lot of reward, without a lot of purpose. To run into a crisis and write a message for a CEO to say, to rebuild trust when he doesn't mean it, is so soul-crushing. And you can only do that for so long. And so that happening while I'm realizing, I'm in this marriage, out of this fear of not wanting to be a single mom like my mom. But, the marriage certainly does not allow me to be, my best self. All of that came crashing around me. And that's when I sort of reheard that steady voice again that I used to really interact with in my childhood, just this knowing, clear, calm voice. And that's really where higher self came from. It's this journey of coming back to myself, of understanding that all of the fear, all the limiting belief systems that I created going through the pain and trauma that I went through, that we all have in different versions, that those strategies were not serving my highest good. And that there was another part of me that really wanted me to live my highest good. And I started to listen and follow it. And that's how, we got to where we are now.
Well, Mory, I think that a lot of people don't really know what higher self is. And maybe they have glimpses of it, but they're not able to articulate it per se.
Sure.
So I know we're going to talk a lot about higher self. I want to go into what that means for you and what that means for the people that you coach and mentor.
Yeah.
But one thing that I was kind of curious about was you had a childhood friend named Google. So we have to give you the credit for inventing the name.
I know, right? I should have trademarked it.
Oh, totally.
Imaginary friend, we should say.
Exactly.
Imaginary childhood friend.
Imaginary childhood friend named Google.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that Google at certain points in your life was your higher self speaking to you?
Oh, yeah. That's the whole reason I talk about him in this book, is that when I was 5 and 6, I had this imaginary friend named Google, and he looked like, like the Rice Krispies guys on the cover?
Yes.
He looked like that, but he was all brown. And I was always in constant dialogue with him. And absolutely, the reason I mention it is because I say, when our kids have imaginary friends, this is their access to their unseen wisdom, to their unseen magic. And that is who that was for me, for sure. And I needed to visualize him in some childlike way to make it make sense to my brain. But, my theory that you'll see in the book is that we come into this world totally aligned to our higher self. And we can talk about what higher self is in a minute. But that alignment means that we are in just very natural, organic dialogue with this unseen, very wise, very magical part of ourselves. And then it's through desiring other people's validation and love and needing that validation for our own safety, particularly from our caregivers. We need them to love us so we can survive, that we trade in the dialogue with this unseen part of us to become something that those other people want or that we think that they want so that they can accept us and bring us into their tribe, bring us into a state of belonging. And that's where we begin to lose connection with this deep, wise, divine part of us.
Do you recall the moment or a moment in your childhood where you felt the disconnect start to happen? Maybe you didn't realize it back at that time, but maybe now in retrospect, you can say that's kind of when I started to shift away from listening to my intuition.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's two moments. One of which I talk about in the book, which is that, I was really looking for my sister's attention. My sister is 9.5 years older than me. And so when I'm 6, she's about 16. And our house is chaos. My parents are not getting along. My father was never home. My mother was constantly heartbroken. And so she became sort of like my mom's therapist. And so she was in her own state of chaos and really disassociated. My sister is also queer, growing up as an Iranian woman, queer in very white Colorado, all of that, just so much pressure. And so I translated that as not being worthy enough for her attention. And I write in the book that there was just one day, I used to make my mom set a place for this imaginary friend, Google, at the sofre. We eat on the ground, Persians. And one day I just, out of the blue, was like, oh yeah, Mojgan, my sister, sat on him. He's gone. And I think it was because I subconsciously realized I wanted to put my energy and attention on doing the things that was going to get my sister's attention, yet simultaneously blaming her in a way for that disconnect. I know it sounds so psychologically complicated, but I think when we're kids, we work out very complicated things psychologically in very simple terms. So that's one moment where I know I specifically chose to disconnect from my own inner world so that I could get her approval.
And what's the other moment?
The other, I think, the Rocky Mountains are sort of a character in this book because they are so magical. And I really still believe, even as I coach people, that nature is your greatest entryway to the unseen, to the divine, to the universe. And I had a lot of access to that as a young child. I was constantly out. We lived at 8,000 feet elevation. So I was in the mountains, beautiful pine trees, and just always in nature. And that was part of my connection too. I spent a lot of time alone outside. And again, really busy. I never felt alone because there was always energy around me that I could sense. And then when my parents got divorced, we moved to Maryland so my mom could be near her family in Maryland. And I totally disconnected. I mean, I know that I disconnected. I went fully into a disassociated behavior of just TV being my babysitter, snacks, the things that you do to just fill the boredom, and not outside and not in dialogue. And that, I think that's the moment that I even think now when I think about depression as a source, as a constant thread in my life, that it started right around that moment of disconnection.
And when you started your work in PR, were you consciously thinking that you would be great in that role because of your ability to, or because of your experience dealing with chaos since a young age, or did it not click with you until later that that's what was happening? It
didn't click that I was doing it for that reason. I knew I was really good at it. I knew that when things got really, really bad, I just knew how to get people out of those situations. I would do that for my friends. Like even my best friend now says like, you're the safest person to be around if we're like, whatever, drinking or whatever, because you're always in control no matter what. And so I now know that that's why, but I knew that it was just something I was naturally good at, and I ran towards it because I also had assimilated into the idea that like from my immigrant parents, everything they sacrificed, the response they expected from us was you get really good grades, you get a very good job, you succeed in your job, and like that then makes our sacrifice worth it. And I took that really seriously. So I went headfirst into corporate world, and I was promoted 8 times by the time I was 35.
Wow.
I was really out to show that I could do this thing, and it came really easily to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you talk about in the book that we compromise ourselves sometimes trying to please other people. And it really is just this vicious cycle of like, the way you phrase it in the book is so perfect. You're striving for this illusion of success and what it means to be a hard worker when really all you're doing is contributing to the bottom line of an organization, especially in corporate America.
Totally.
At what point did you realize in your career, because I know that you had a very successful career in PR in corporate America for 20 years. At what point in your career did you start to say, I'm making compromises here and this isn't feeling good?
Yeah. It started as a quiet whisper. And this is what I want people to really know about your higher self or your intuition, is that it's always talking to you. And it tries to get your attention in different ways. And so for me, it was just this whisper of like, going to a meeting with a client and being able to tell they didn't actually care about their employees. They didn't actually care about this thing they did where now the laptops were exploding. Like, you know what I mean? Like they didn't actually care. They just wanted to get back to profit. And going home and just feeling this self being like, what are you doing? What is this for? What is this for? Beyond just being good at it. Like there's a point at which you prove you're good at something and then it's like, now what? What's the point? So it was that, I call it like this irritating question that wouldn't leave me alone. It was like constantly haunting me. What is this for the sake of? And that grew louder and louder to the point where it really sucked the enjoyment out of it. Like there was a part of my job that was really exciting and interesting. I was in Amsterdam one minute, Shanghai the next. Like I traveled a lot. I sat across leaders of big brands all the time. As a very young person, woman of color, like I was proving a lot and it was exciting. But that question got so loud that it drained the excitement out of the experience. And then it was like, oh, shoot, I got to find a way to answer this question. Like, what is this for the sake of? And when I couldn't answer it, that's when it was like, I talk about like on the ground, 8 months pregnant, sobbing, because it was like, oh, shit, I don't know what I'm doing any of this for anymore.
Oh, wow, Mory, I didn't realize that. So in that moment in the book, when you're in your kitchen, you're on the ground sobbing, and you realize that you're not in the relationship that you want to be in, you already had a successful career at that moment.
Oh, yeah. I was the breadwinner. I was, I had little kids, 1 and 3 years old, and I'd be in between 5 countries in the span of 2 weeks. So, I mean, huge credit goes to my mom for my ability to do that, for sure, because she really was my co-parent. But yeah, I was pregnant in that same agency that I talk about getting promoted and being pregnant. And like, yeah, I was doing a lot all at once.
Well, and the reason I ask is that I think that this is a really important thing to touch on, because it's not as though you were in a relationship where you were depending on your husband as being the breadwinner.
Right.
Even though you were the breadwinner, you still felt stuck.
Yeah.
And this was because of the thing that we all buy into, wanting to please everyone and stick to this framework that we consider to be success and traditional and whatnot.
Well, and also watching my mom as a child and refusing to go down that same road. Like really, I forced a very traditional family unit out of a place of fear that's not what I had growing up. It wasn't that it was organic. And I even say in the book, my ex-husband, credit to him, said to me, like, we should not get married until I'm 30. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And I was like, well, too bad. This is my plan. I'm going to have a baby by 28. I'm going to have my second baby by 30. I did both of those things. And that saying, like, you make plans and the universe laughs. Well, it's because when you're controlling something so tightly, and the reason we control things so tightly is because we're trying to heal, like assuage some fear, then you don't get to actually let your life unfold in the way that it's organically supposed to for your highest good. And so for me, it was, I'm not going to be a single mom. I'm going to stay, even though this hurts, even though it's sometimes chaotic and sometimes even dangerous. I'm going to stay because I will never sit at that kitchen table alone like I watched her do when I was going to go out with my friends. I will never fear over having another parent in the house to help me when they're teenagers the way she is. Like, so I made that trade-off in my mind.
And it's interesting because I think that, and you do a beautiful job at describing this in the book, but sometimes those moments where everything kind of comes to a head and you think, oh my gosh, my world is falling apart.
Yeah.
It's really an opening for your higher self to really shine through in your life and guide you.
Yeah.
And not even maybe in a woo-woo way on some levels, but not just in a woo-woo way. I mean, like, you have this moment where you feel like you receive clarity, and it's true. And it goes back to your point. Your higher self is always speaking to you.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to get to that moment so it can scream so that you can hear it.
That's right. Your crisis is your awakening. It really is your invitation back to your truest essence. It is when all else fails, when all the plans you made do not work out, when life hurts, the one that's there for you is this truest part of your soul, which is your higher self. And if we can see it that way, then the crisis becomes such a beautiful opportunity for our expansion.
Kind of like when in the book, you talk about when people tell you that they lost their job. And
I'm like, yay.
Exactly.
Or they say they're getting divorced and I say, congratulations. And people look at me like, are you insane?
Well, because it's easier to stay sometimes.
For sure. For me, I think my favorite quote, by the way, is by Anais Nin, and it is, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And that quote says it all, right? Like, for me, what is more sad is if I watch someone who I love remain small and contracted and stuck in a romantic relationship or in a job. That hurts me more than I'm making a change, which looks like I got divorced, I got laid off, I quit my job. Like, to me, that's exciting because it's like, ooh, now you get to really stand in your dignity. You get to expand. You get to experience life as you deserve to experience it, not in a contracted state.
And so, Mory, you have this epiphany while you're working that you ask yourself, what is this for? You can't answer the question.
Yeah.
How soon after leaving your job did you start 822 Group?
Well, this is where the magic comes in. I knew that I was getting depressed because my now husband, I had started dating at that time, and he's like, you are like you're absent, and the kids are noticing. And that was when I was like, shit. And so I started to be like, well, what do you want? And I went down this journey of like, what's your dream? What if you were allowed to want something else? What would it be? And I began to see really clearly that it was to work for myself and to have control over the way I consulted people, not do it the way that my agency said we did it. And so I started dreaming up 822 Group while I was still there. And I would do it. I would do it on the side. I would create the website, or I would write a little paragraph. And, I think that one of the things I've learned that I teach now is that if you show up and you do your part, the universe shows up and does its part. And so I would do that. And I would always just say, like, bring me the opportunity. I'm open. I am willing. And as I was doing this, there was a nonprofit that I did a workshop for as part of my agency. And one of the guys said to me, the company I work for, a big financial services company, is really like, they're in a mess. Would your agency be willing to send a proposal? And in that moment, I heard my higher self, and out of my mouth came, what if it's just me? What if it's not them? And he's like, great, you're the one we want anyway. And so I booked that client, and that was my life raft out of that place.
I love that. And I remember reading that in the book, and actually something similar happened to me when I started my business.
Yeah.
I was super unhappy. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was my higher self telling me, like, leave, do your own thing, you know? But I landed a client.
Yeah.
So I quit my job, and then it turns out that client didn't work out.
Oh, no.
But it was okay because I was able to start my business, and it all worked out.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sometimes things come along just to dislodge you. Relationships are like that too. Like sometimes when you're stuck in a relationship and you meet someone else, even the attraction, even if you don't do something about it, that attraction is a dislodging event. It's like wait a minute, what's happening? Why is my energy going over here? It allows you to look at what's wrong, and it allows you to move on to a place that, you know, provides a new future, which it sounds like that's what that was for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mory, now after having all these experiences, starting your own business and finding your life's calling, really, what is higher self? What does it mean to you now, having all these experiences under your belt?
You know, your higher self is the truest part of your soul. It is the part that is unencumbered by fear, unencumbered by limitation, and full of inherent self-worth or dignity. It knows what you are worthy of. And it is also full of wisdom. It has the answer to every question you could ever want. And it speaks to you through intuition. You know, one way I love that I've heard it described is like when your soul chooses to manifest in a body to have tangible experiences, it sort of kind of splits in two. There's part of your soul that goes into this body to have the tangible human experience. So imagine yourself now dropped in and down in the forest. Mm-hmm. And there's a part of your soul that sits on the mountaintop. And it is watching, it is sending signals, it is guiding so that you are navigating this forest to the place, you know, out to the light, out to where you want to be in your life. And it's constantly able to kind of see your life from a bird's eye view. It's not in the experience, in the pain of it. Mm-hmm. And so without the pain of the experience, there's expansion, there's possibility, there's endless love, there's hope. And so your higher self is that aspect of you that represents all of those things, guiding you really lovingly towards what you really desire.
I love that. I've never heard it phrased that way, but I think that is so beautiful and so accurate.
Yeah.
And another thing that you phrase so differently is you talk about our younger selves and things that they develop to protect us.
Yeah.
And how those mechanisms can negatively impact us now because those were fear-based beliefs, fear-based thoughts that obviously no longer serve us now because we're not in the same circumstances. Mm-hmm. How would you explain that to somebody who's never heard of higher self and how we lose it over time? How would you explain that to someone for the first time?
Because of that need to exist with others and get their validation and their belonging, we create belief systems about ourselves. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm too much. I'm not enough. I am only valuable when I solve other people's problems. You know, whatever belief system I'm lazy, whatever. Those beliefs help our little selves explain the world around us to us because it's so confusing and painful. And they then, from those belief systems, create strategies like people pleasing, like shutting down and going away. You know, there's all these strategies that we create. And those strategies created by those younger selves who are trapped in a moment of pain and in a limiting belief about themselves stay with us our whole lives. And when we do not stop to recognize that these are younger versions of ourselves with outdated old strategies that come from a little 8-year-old brain or a 5-year-old brain, it's like letting a little 5-year-old sit behind the driver's seat and can't even see over the steering wheel, but is driving the car of your life. So when you're 35 and you are being presented this crazy opportunity to leave your job and start your own business, the part of you that's excited, the part of you that also is very calm and knows, yes, that part of you is sometimes outdone by the younger part that's like, no, we don't have what it takes. We're too lazy. Whatever those belief systems are. And it becomes this sort of battle if you're lucky. But what happens with most of us is because we don't know it's our younger selves and we don't know we have our higher self, we believe the limited thought as being our own. We believe that we are that thing. Fear takes over and projects a reality that is not real. Fear is a liar. It never tells you the truth, but it's trying to protect you. And so what I tell clients when we're in this work is the moment that you feel that contraction, whatever it is, you get asked to do something, you get asked on a date and immediately you're like, duh, I don't want to go. I want you to stop right there and just ask, who is that in there? Which version of me just got really freaked out by that? Okay. Immediately your consciousness will conjure it for you. Oh, that's a 6-year-old me that never was able to make friends when I started elementary school. Okay, hold on a minute. Let me visualize that 6-year-old. What do you need right now? Well, I really need friendship. Okay. You don't have to try to get it the way you used to. I got what you need. I'm going to take that need to higher self, and we're going to get you that need met in a different way. That's how you work with this fear part of you, these younger selves and higher self at once.
And how do you recommend that people that have a lot of fear in their lives distinguish the difference between a fear-based thought and an intuitive thought from higher self?
This is my favorite question because you've read the book, because deciphering between your fear self and your higher self, or a fear thought and your intuition, is the unlocking tool to being able to follow your intuition. That is it right there. And the first thing I'll tell you is that fear, any thought that comes from fear, is going to create an emotion. What's an example of an emotion that fear creates for you?
Anxiety.
There you go. So it's going to create a uncomfortable or upsetting feeling within you. Intuition is totally emotionally neutral. What does that mean to you when I say that?
That means to me that it's more of a knowing than it is a feeling.
Yeah, some people experience it as a feeling, but not a difficult feeling. It's just is. It just drops in it's like a period at the end of a sentence. It's just there. It shows up. And that knowing feeling, being able to tell, this thought is creating an emotional charge. This thought is not, allows you to say, this is my fear. These are my younger selves. They're the ones offering up this thought because there's an emotional charge. And here's my higher self because this does not have an emotion attached to it. Then you get to choose which thought am I going to believe? And that is a practice. It does not happen overnight, but it's really about holding yourself accountable to this exercise of this one has a lot of emotion, this one doesn't. Which one do I choose to believe? And it's about choosing that intuitive thought more and more and more, and then following that intuitive thought and acting on it and watching the evidence. Our brains require evidence to believe in things. So we need to act on the intuition, watch what we get in response, and from there we'll be able to build evidence that, in fact, my intuition's always guiding me in the right place. And my fear is projecting a bunch of assumptions that I guarantee I don't have much evidence for being true.
And so for someone who maybe isn't in touch with their higher self right now, you think the first thing the main takeaway is to, if it creates anything that's negative or spiritually draining, it's not your higher self.
That's right. That's right. Your higher self never drains you. It either energizes you or it calms you. An intuitive thought never feels bad. Now, I do want to clarify, your fear is very smart, and sometimes it might immediately grab the intuitive thought and add a layer of fear to it. So in my case, when I intuitively knew I had to leave that first marriage, my fear immediately grabbed that knowing and was like, let me tell you all the reasons that this is going to be terrible to do. So fear will get in there, but I'm talking about pay attention to the first feeling, the first sensation you get when the thought comes through.
Oh, that's actually really important because you have that knowing and you know it feels right. fear creeps in, then you think, oh, maybe it was wrong.
Yes.
But no, that's fear being smart. I like that.
Fear is grabbing it and trying to protect you. Fear is just trying to protect you by saying, if you listen to that voice, you're going to be a single mom with no relationship, no love, isolated, I'm using my own, fear list. And then you have to really recognize, oh, these thoughts of being a single mom alone with no love in my life, how does that make me feel? Terrible. How could that possibly be my higher self? My higher self never wants me to feel terrible.
Well, and actually, it's interesting because I'm just thinking of this for the first time, having this conversation. When I was younger, I grew up in a small town called Laredo, Texas. And as one might imagine, it wasn't conducive to being who you are.
Totally.
It was highly influenced by like Hispanic culture, which is beautiful. But a part of that Hispanic culture is there are very strict gender roles, as I'm sure there are in Iranian culture as well. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be in gymnastics, and my mom was like, Alexander, you don't want to do gymnastics, And she wasn't saying it from a place like a horrible place. My mom is very supportive of me and everything I do. But I think it was more of like back to what you talk about wanting to fit in.
Yeah.
And now that I'm thinking back, I really do believe that that's where I felt that I needed to do. And that was my first time compromising. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that you work with two people who I absolutely love, Jonathan Van Ness, Dylan Mulvaney. Seeing them, I think Jonathan was the first one, seeing the way he was so authentically himself and unapologetic, and you can actually see his light shine through, made me feel almost like I had permission to be myself.
Yes.
And I think that the inner gymnast in me when I was a kid, I felt that was a part of my higher self wanting to express itself in that way.
Yeah, it's so funny. You know how much they love being a gymnast. They still go to the gym and do flips and things like that, Jonathan. No, I love that. And I'm glad you say that because I try to remind Jonathan and Dylan and Alok, and many, many more really brilliant queer artists, performers that I have the honor of guiding in this lifetime. They have their days where all of this gets to them. There's only so many death threats you can receive in a day and still be able to be buoyant and joyous. And we're certainly not right now in a administration that even allows them to exist. And I try to remind them, I want you to think about the people who you're giving permission to exist. And you are an example of their higher self. You're showing them what it is to be embodying your higher self. I'd say in the book, I think queer people have taught me a lot about true self-love because you really have to love yourself enough to want to live your truth. And there are so many people who don't live their truth. And so I think we have a lot to learn from the LGBTQ plus community because it's such a constant fight for truth and for living your truth. And that has to come from a genuine place of love and alignment to a higher truth, your higher self.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm as a gay man myself, before I came out, I was a smoker. I would drink all the time. I was really overweight. And I really do believe that was because I was making so many compromises, not being myself.
Yeah.
Getting to work with people like Jonathan Van Ness, Dylan Mulvaney, who have such a huge impact in their communities and beyond. How has that changed what higher self means to you?
It actually has just furthered my belief that we all, no matter what we accomplish, are a system of beings that is inclusive of a bunch of younger selves and your higher self. And that no matter who I've met, I have people who I coach that I think, wow, I never thought as a kid I'd be looking at you on a Zoom and guiding you because I used to watch you on TV or whatever, right? That they have the same exact limiting beliefs, the same exact struggles with imposter syndrome, and the same exact glorious, magnificent higher selves that my best friend does, or my daughter does, or, other people who I get to interact with. So I actually think that what I'm learning is that there's no amount of accomplishment that makes you more valuable than the next person. And that when you are aligned to your higher self, you move in a way where you know that. And these people happen to be people who make people feel loved because they genuinely exude that knowing.
And you talk in your book about your experiences with a psychic named Rhea.
Yeah, my mentor. Yes,
your mentor.
Yes.
Your mentor and psychic Rhea.
Yeah.
When she was telling you things that you maybe found a little unbelievable at the time, was there a little part of you that was like, no, I think she might be right?
Oh, for sure. And the way it showed up was like genuine, overjoyed excitement. The cynic was like, stop it. Do not get excited. What is she's saying? You're going to coach famous people? Like, you're in a PR agency. You know what I mean? Like, maybe she's thinking about the crisis management you do. You know, the cynic wants to, or you're going to live in California in a blended family with the love of your life. Like, who's this love of your life? Like, why would you live in California? All of this has come to be. So yes, there is definitely the cynic because it wants to protect you. But there was a knowing. When you hear truth, your cells respond to it. Pay attention to that. It can be a little like, hair stands up on the back of your neck or you get goosebumps or whatever it is. When you hear something that's possible. We were talking before we started recording that I say in the book that I always knew I was going to live in California and that when I'd come to California for work, it felt like home. But I didn't know how to explain why it felt like home because it looked nothing like Maryland or Colorado. And it's because that's that knowing part of you. That's like, yeah, this is on some space-time continuum has already happened. And so you recognize it and you know it. And so there's that recognition of truth that I think happens for sure.
And before we started recording, Mory, and maybe I mentioned it during this conversation now, but reading your book, there have been so many little synchronicities that I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, so similar. Moving to California, that was one for me too. And actually reading about Rhea, it was so crazy because a psychic actually told me too. She said, you're going to be moving to the West Coast. You're going to be working in marketing and you're going to be around a bunch of celebrities. You're going to be friends with celebrities. You're going to work with them. And I started thinking, there's no way. I live in Austin, Texas. Like, how is that going to happen? And sure enough, and actually I wanted to share with you, that same psychic, I had a reading with her like 2 weeks ago. And she said to me, you're going to be interviewing an author.
Wow.
And she's psychic. And then I remember.
She called me out.
Literally. And then I said, I thought to myself, well, I knew I was going to interview you. And I was like, well, I'm interviewing an author, but I don't believe she's psychic. And then I read your book and I was like, okay, she's an intuitive. That's so crazy.
That's hilarious. This is the thing about, I say this in the book, we don't honor these gifts enough in our society anymore. We used to. There was a time when our ancestors really revered the oracle and really revered this sense of connecting to the unknown and astrology and things like that. And I think we're seeing a resurgence for sure, which makes me excited. I think any time in history where there's so much uncertainty, we go back to the wise ones. We go back to the knowers, the seers. My job is, yes, I totally am an intuitive. I channel, I know things, but all of us can do it. And that's my purpose, is to remind us all, we all have this gift and we can tap into it anytime we want to.
Can you talk about a time where you were working with a client where you felt like you knew the answer to exactly what they needed to do in a specific situation, and you were met with resistance, but you ended up being right, and you're not really sure how?
Yeah, when I was at the agency, that happened a lot because there were ways you did things in corporate America and ways you didn't do them. So it could be something like this company, Fortune 500, new CEOs coming in. We need to prep a whole packet for investors on them, and I would just be like, this person's not going to last more than 5 weeks. I just know it. I know they're here and they're gone. And we're going to do all this work and we're going to make it look embarrassing. But, how are you going to explain that to the client? You can't. So, but there are other ways, smaller ways where I would try to push back and just say that, it didn't feel right. Or, the thing I can intuit the best, I'm a very relational being. I intuit emotion really well. So it's like how I know people will feel in a situation or how you might be feeling right now. I can feel that. And so I would always kind of worn around, hey, if we do this, employees are going to feel this way. No, that's ridiculous. Look at what we're giving them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we do it and the employees would feel that way. And then it'd be all over Glassdoor. And, it's like, it doesn't even feel good to say I told you anymore. It's just like, what am I doing? Why am I shouting into the wind? And I'm so lucky that now I think because I've set a standard for myself, I only work with clients who really respect what it is I have to offer. And, I've set a rate too, like I'm expensive because when I tell you something, it's going to work. And only the people I ask this of the universe, magnetize people to me who are ready to hear the message or ready to do the work. And for now, luckily, that's who I'm surrounded by from a client standpoint.
And Mory, is there a question that you've never been asked that you would like to be asked that can shed more light on your work and what it means to be in pursuit of your higher self?
That's a great question. Is there a question I've never been asked? I think I would love if people would take all of us authors, experts, guides, influencers, whatever, off of the pedestal and ask, when are the moments when you're still in fear? When are the moments when you don't hear your higher self? Because I want everyone to know that I teach this stuff. I spent 2 years writing this book. My life is research for this book. And I still, as recently as yesterday, have moments where my fear self is so loud that I can't connect at all. And so if you were to ask me about that, what I'd say is what I've learned to do is with a very gentle, compassionate voice that I know is my higher self, just say, you're just going to be in fear today. You're not going to decide anything. You're not allowed to do anything, but you are going to have this experience because clearly this is the experience you're in. So that's something I'm really learning, again, as recently. And I think as a parent, the thing that triggers your most irrational fear the most are your children. And so right now I'm worried about my son on something that is ridiculous, has to do with basketball. Like that's how silly it is. But all of my fears came rushing in around, well, then this is going to mean this and this is going to mean that. And really, I gave myself the space to just be worried yesterday, not do anything. Don't make any decisions from the worry. Just, you want to be worried, but your rule is the solution is never in the worry. So don't look for it there.
Oh, I love that, Mory. And it's interesting because irrational fear specifically, we understand on a certain level that it is irrational and it's probably never going to happen.
Right.
Yet our emotions believe it, like as if it were fact right then and there.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because the little ones are in the driver's seat. Because we're not stopping to look and say, who is that's so scared right now? And I did. I stopped. I looked. Oh, there's that 26-year-old that's in this marriage to this person who's emotionally irrational. What is she afraid of? That's what her son is doing. Like I had to do the work and really talk to the 26-year-old and be like, that's not who he is. He's a different person. But she had control. She was like, I'm driving this car. This is too scary. Let alone not thinking about this is a 14-year-old who has hormones and who, you know what I mean? Like, come on, this is what a kid does. So it's really the reason I think that the fear is so overwhelming is because we don't see the actual believer of the belief system in it. We believe we are the fear instead of looking and finding the previous version of us that is trying to communicate to us through the fear.
I love that. And to anybody who hasn't read the book already, definitely read it because you do a fabulous job at kind of guiding us step by step how to heal those parts of ourselves. And throughout the entire book, one of my favorite things was that at the end of every chapter, there was a little exercise. And I actually, sometimes, usually I won't do them, but for years I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. Like, let's just see what happens. Yeah. And it was actually so therapeutic and illuminating.
Good.
So yeah, anyone who hasn't read the book needs to because it's really fabulous. Mory, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned so far?
That when I am in the full embodiment of my dignity and in my knowing, truly, I am the most magnetic and anything is possible. And that those contracted parts of myself they need to go under the cover, they need rest, they need love, but they are not allowed to make any decisions in my life.
I love that. And Mory, where can people keep up with your work and find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Mory Fontanez. You can buy Higher Self anywhere that you would buy books. It's also on Audible. My husband, for example, only listens to nonfiction, so he was like listening to the book the last couple of weeks. But yeah, anywhere that you buy books, and I'm on Instagram, constantly sharing these little nuggets.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to include the link to the book in the video notes and in the podcast notes.
Great.
And I'm also going to include your social media handles there as well.
Amazing. I forgot to mention, this is terrible. I have a podcast. It's called Signal, and it's a conversation with my best friend about all of these things. So that's also a really great place to keep up with this kind of content in a very practical and funny way.
Well, I'll include that as well.
Awesome.
and Mory, if you could go back in time and say, give one bit of advice to your younger self, specifically tailored for you and your journey, what would it be?
You really are exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you are meant to be doing. You're doing the damn best with what has been presented to you. Be proud of yourself. You really are. You are magnificent. You are this beautiful, divine little being, really navigating a very complicated life.
Well, Mory, I love that. And thank you so much for your time today. This was so amazing. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Alexander. It's been so delightful to talk to you. Thanks for all the really good questions.